This is such a broad topic that I am about to go over. I wrestled for a while with doing study abroad tips. Did I like study abroad? Should you study abroad? Studying abroad worth it? And that last one is what I went with. Because all of these, in a sense, kind of connect back to that at the end as to whether or not it's worth it, because I'm going over really just all the different facets of studying abroad. And I guess my experience studying abroad this first semester. Anyway, welcome back to my channel if you have been here before, and welcome if you are new. My name is Michaela, and I make academic content and, as of late, study abroad videos, because I've been studying abroad in Bristol, England, where I've been at the University of Bristol for this past semester, and I'm going to be there again for the second semester, but I am currently at home for the winter break. There's several things I'm going to talk about in this video, so feel free to skip around to wherever you want. I'm going to put all of the different topics in the timestamps. First, do I like study abroad? Uchicago study abroad in particular will be a category. Finances to think about. Actually moving abroad, like the physical process of going abroad. Opportunities with traveling abroad, but then also the tougher parts. And then, should you study abroad? Which I could make a whole video on all of these probably, and maybe I will with some of them. Starting off with a really hefty question here. Do I like studying abroad? Short answer, yes, I do. The thing is there's so many different parts to studying abroad that there's no way I could say I like all of it, and there's no way I could say that I dislike it, because I do love it. I love studying abroad. It's been the time of my life, just waking up and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm in the United Kingdom right now. It's just a very bizarre feeling. To get more specific, I think that one of the things I like the most about it is the location, which obviously if I studied abroad in England, I went there because of the location. That's kind of a given. But I think that I really realized, because I was at the University of Chicago, I'm usually a uchicago student. I didn't realize how much I didn't like the location of Chicago until I've been in Bristol. And I'm not saying that Chicago's bad or anything, but just compared to Bristol, Bristol's just fantastic. I go everywhere in Bristol. I go hours away from Bristol. Downtown Chicago is cool, but aside from that, I could go to Michigan or something, but there's not, and this isn't to disparage the American Midwest or anything, but there's nothing in I don't want to say anything controversial, but there's nothing to do out there. And if I want to go to downtown Chicago, I've got to take the public transportation to get there, which is something I wouldn't exactly want to do traveling alone. Without opening up that can of worms, I feel very comfortable walking around late at night in Bristol and traveling on my own anywhere in England, which by itself is such an incredible reason to be abroad, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much, is just the safety of it. I'm starting to get a little bit off topic. But while the actual location is better than the University of Chicago, I have discovered that the classes, the University of Bristol itself, it's a remarkable university, definitely, but I have found that it's not quite to the standard that University of Chicago is. I think that the structure of teaching is better at Chicago. The resources are better. I like the class structure. I like how the classes are done. I like the classes that they offer more at Chicago. Everything about the teaching and academics itself, Chicago is better in my opinion. I do love University of Bristol. I've loved my classes, especially the seminars. Seminars were really good, but it's just not the same, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it exactly, but I just prefer the academics at Chicago. That being said, I am going to make a whole other video on this, kind of the pros and cons of the University of Bristol, so definitely subscribe to my channel if you want to watch those future videos, because I am going to go deeper into that. But another part, what I am glad about with studying abroad, is that I'm doing a full year. It took a while to settle in. I'm not going to lie. It took a long time to settle in, and I think that if I were going back to Chicago this winter, I would be so crushed, because I really started feeling like I was getting comfortable in Bristol, just towards the end of the first semester. I'm so happy I'm going to be there for another second semester, because I think I'm going to make a lot more out of it than I did the first. I didn't really go many places during October, all of October. And it was only in November that I started traveling and actually doing things in England. So yeah, I like studying abroad. The next thing I wanted to talk about was Uchicago. So if you don't go to Uchicago, you can just skip this part. Just kind of talking about what exactly the program is that I'm doing. So I'm doing direct enrollment, and this differs from a majority of the programs at the University of Chicago, because what it is I'm basically an exchange student. I am essentially a University of Bristol student right now. I'm directly enrolled in the classes. I'm on their grading system. I am taught by their professors. I am with University of Bristol students. I'm not with Chicago people. This is opposed to most of the programs for study abroad, which is when you go with a cohort of other Uchicago students and Uchicago faculty, and you receive Uchicago grades, it counts for your GPA. This is different in that you're very completely alone in a sense. Uchicago is very hands-off. They don't help with paperwork at all. The only thing they do is you first have to apply to Uchicago to even be considered for the direct enrollment. Then your application is essentially forwarded to the university that you're going to be going to, and they decide whether or not to accept you. For this entire process, uchicago doesn't really help. They do offer help, like there's an advisor I can reach out to, so I don't want to make it sound like uchicago's like, oh, you're on your own, because they don't do that. But it's not as easy to like do the paperwork. I guess paperwork is harder. I wrote down convenience on this list. I don't even remember what that means. Competition, yeah. So the study abroad for Chicago, the thing is, it's like not guaranteed. Like if you apply, there are people who didn't get into study abroad opportunities, and I think it's very luck based, because I think that if you put in the time to put in an application, like I'm sure everyone was making a nice application, and I think it all kind of comes down to how many people are applying for a certain program, and then how many just happen to get it, because there's just too many applicants for the number of students that actually get to study abroad. If you're hoping to do study abroad at uchicago, it's not like guaranteed, but the good thing is if you have options, like if you're able to do multiple programs at uchicago and you apply to several of them, you'll probably get into one. It's just tougher if you don't have multiple programs to apply to, like there's only one that you're interested in or something like that. The finances are basically you pay the same tuition, and this goes for direct enrollment as well. You pay the same tuition that you would pay uchicago, and you still get your financial aid and everything, and the only difference is you're paying for housing and airplane money, and you've got to pay like a deposit thing, because the finances are tricky. There's a lot of information on it, and it's very nuanced, so you want to kind of read the fine print when it comes to that. So finances themselves, I am not an expert on this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I guess I kind of want to more prepare you if you're planning on studying abroad, what you might be paying for. So obviously the tuition, depending on if you're paying your school or paying the study abroad school. You also have to factor in transportation expenses. I'm lucky because Boston to London flights are not exorbitant compared to other international flights. The hardest thing for me with transportation is I have to take a bus from Bristol to London, which is like 2.5 hours, and then I fly from London to Boston, and then I have to ride back home from Boston to home, which is like another 2-hour drive. So it just ends up being a long travel day, but just kind of like factor in the added complications with transportation. Even though getting to and from your location will probably be more expensive, travel itself is likely going to be cheaper wherever you are. I went to Germany at the beginning of December. I will tell you that my round trip flight ticket cost me about £50. If I flew into Dortmund, Germany from the United States, that would have been, I'll look it up on Expedia once I'm done. Oh man. Okay, time out. Okay, I hope we're not tilted here. So for finances also, one thing you might typically have at your college is a dining hall. Dining meal plans will probably be different wherever you study abroad. So for me, there was catered food available in some residence halls, but it was like very limited and expensive, weird times. So I didn't do that. So I'm basically self-catering, which obviously you do if you move off campus and you have your own apartment. But it's just another thing to think about. Actually moving abroad. The hardest thing for me was getting my visa. It took so long. It took so much work. Like a lot of paperwork, and then driving to Boston to get fingerprints and photos, and then they wanted me to mail my passport, which I didn't even know about until they said, hey, you've got to mail your passport. Long story short, prepare in advance for that, know that it's going to take a while. Then you've also got to, especially if you're doing direct enrollment, you've got to do all of the enrollment stuff for your actual university. Like when you're a freshman at your college, like when I was a freshman at uchicago, I had to do all these enrollment things, and then I had to do them again with the University of Bristol because I was basically a student there. Like getting a new email, signing up for classes, just all of those typical administration type things. And then also getting your things to the place. So what I did was when I moved in, I put all of my items into checked bags, and it ended up being so much cheaper because shipping things internationally is outrageously expensive. It's just not something you want to do. Pack lightly. That is like biggest tip, is just do not bring a lot of stuff. You're only going to be there 1 year, so don't bring like fancy decorations and everything. I literally brought like a few papers to put up on my wall, and that's it. I have hardly any decorations. Opportunities. So some of the best parts of studying abroad. Travel, which I already kind of mentioned. You have access to all these different locations that you don't usually have access to. It doesn't matter where you're studying abroad, you're going to be closer to these really cool travel destinations, and take advantage of them. Like I'm in England, so I'm trying to take advantage of the fact that Bath is a 15-minute train ride away. So I went there and I explored this astronomy museum, and I went to the Roman baths and everything. And I'm hoping to hit so many more places because, like I said, I really didn't do anything until after October ended, which is quite shameful. Don't do what I did, and take advantage of where you are. Also, another opportunity is just getting off of your usual campus. This makes it sound like I don't like uchicago. I do love uchicago, but it felt good to just get away for a year. I'm really happy just to have all these new sites. Also, it's once in a lifetime because right now, during your studies, it's so much easier to get up and move as opposed to when you have a job that you're more committed to and you can't just fly off and live internationally for. That's not to say that there aren't tougher aspects to consider. This is probably more of the bulkier part of this video. One thing that's hard, that I found hardest, is obtaining credits, especially if you have a jam-packed academic load at your college and you already know, like, oh, this semester I'm taking these 4 classes, this semester I'm doing these 4 requirements. It makes it hard studying abroad, especially if your college isn't lenient, because you need to have the classes you're taking abroad count for what you need to graduate at your home university. So for me, what really stunk, is that I'm able to take 12 courses at uchicago per year. I'm able to take 6 courses per year at University of Bristol. It is relatively the same workload. So you would think to yourself, oh, well, each class at Bristol must count for 2 uchicago classes. That would be fair, right? They're all worth 1 year's worth of work. Not according to uchicago. They were like, you can have 1 class at Bristol count as 1 class at uchicago, which means it's as though I'm taking only half of the courses that I could be taking at uchicago, and it's very frustrating. I'm very fortunate in that I'm still able to graduate on time. I'm still able to fit in both my major and my minor, because the creative writing major doesn't have too many requirements, nor does the minor. But you need to really talk ahead with your advisor, because it's critical that you go into study abroad knowing whether or not you'll still be able to graduate on time with the classes that you'll be taking at the study abroad university. So make sure you research all of that, both the classes you can take at the university, whether or not they'll count, how many credits they'll count for. All of that is so important. Finding classes that fit the major, that's also hard, because I was going through and there were some classes at Bristol, I was like, oh, these are really neat, and I wanted to take them, and they're like, you can't take that because you're a study abroad student. And I was like, okay, well, I will take this one. And again, creative writing, it's easier to find classes that count for that. Literature counts, so I was able to take a whole bunch of those, but they won't count any writing classes as workshop classes. So actually, in that sense, it does limit me a little bit. You have to make sure in advance that you see classes you'd be interested in that are relevant to what you're studying. Making friends. This one's interesting. One thing I've kind of grappled with is, do I go out and do this social event because I'm going to be leaving in June anyway? How much does it matter? Which is really not probably a good mindset to have, but nevertheless, it's something I kind of had to keep thinking about. And I've come to the conclusion that doing as many things as possible, whether independently or socially, that's what makes you remember each day individually, and it'll make everything last longer. It means you'll have more memories of what you're doing. So that is kind of a tougher part of studying abroad, is making friends in the first place, and then making these friends knowing that you're going to have to leave them in June. It's kind of something you can't help thinking about while you're there. Another thing is you're going to have FOMO. It's kind of inevitable, because you're going to be missing out on your on-campus opportunities and events at your home university. So whether if you're president of an RSO, or there's a certain class that you want to take, or a certain event that's just happening at your school dances, just things that you're not doing with your own friends back at your home university, you're missing out on stuff. That's something you have to consider. Like, do you want to go away half a year, let alone an entire year, knowing that you're going to be missing out on these things? Getting accustomed to a new culture. For me, this is relatively easy. England is not very different from the United States relative to other countries. They're both Western English-speaking countries. There's just things to get accustomed to for me. But where you're going, where you're studying abroad, you might have a lot of culture shock. That can be a little bit challenging, especially if you're alone and you don't know anyone. For me, probably the trickiest thing is the grading system, because it made me feel really bad about my grades. And maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just really weird about it. But that was hard for me. So the final category is, should you study abroad? And I know this answer is going to be annoying, but I can't answer this question for you because there are so many different factors that it's going to depend on. And that's a really obnoxious answer, I know. So I did come up with some guiding questions to hopefully help you come to the conclusion of whether or not you should study abroad. Are you okay with being absent on your campus for a semester or a year, however long it is that you'd be gone for? Would you be okay with saying goodbye to all your friends for that long? Is it financially feasible for you? Do you have financial aid that you'd be given by your school to be able to do this? Is this something you'd be able to afford while paying for your housing and your meals and everything? Is there a location that you can see yourself enjoying and exploring? Because if you study abroad and it's not a place that you love, it's not a place you feel connected to, then it's almost not worth it. You want to be able to discover things while you're there. So is there a place that you feel drawn to? And do you feel prepared to be far from home? This was probably actually the hardest thing for me. In November, around right before Thanksgiving, we had a family emergency and I had to fly home for that. I wasn't able to be at home when I would have liked to have been there. I was able to get there, but it's just one of those things, I couldn't help but think, what am I doing here on the other side of the world when my family, everyone I know and care about, is way over there? It's not easy. You can't help but think about all of the time you're missing out on. Now more than ever, I think about how everyone I love is aging and we're all getting older. And yet here I am at times, especially when I first moved to Bristol, it felt like I was squandering that time with those people I care about. And I was just so far away from them. So you have to, if you're going to study abroad, you have to be ready to know you're going to be away from those people and know that you're going to have to find ways to communicate and connect with them outside of in-person contact. You know, you have to be okay with doing FaceTime and phone calls, which I can't even fathom how people back in the day used to do it, you know, when you'd have to write letters and everything, because it's hard enough even having these privileges of FaceTime and text messages. But I think this is the biggest question that you're gonna have to ask yourself. Are you okay with being away from your loved ones and knowing it might be hard to get back to them if they need you in an emergency? And on that depressing note, that's everything I have on here. Is studying abroad worth it? Yes. And if I were to encompass my experiences with my first semester, I would say it makes me want to go back for more, which is really the best situation because I have to go back for more anyway, whether I like it or not. So it works out in my favor. But thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I also hope you have a really good holiday season.